If you're after a website or domain, then check out today's sponsor, Squarespace. Hello again, hope you're doing well, and thanks for joining us for another video. I've often seen people claiming that NASA fakes their ISS onboard videos, and that they do this by using green screen techniques. And one video that often gets cited as proof of this is this video from February 2016 of former US President George H.W. Bush visiting the Johnson Space Center in Houston and talking to some of the astronauts who were on board the ISS. However, what people pick up on from this isn't actually really anything to do with this video. It's that as Mr. Bush is being pushed through mission control, we can see on one of the screens behind him a view of astronaut Tim Peake standing in front of a blue screen. Now, Tim was on the ISS at this time. He was on Expedition 46 from December 2015 until June 2016. In reality, what we're seeing here isn't even close to being used for some sort of special effects trickery. People are just jumping to that conclusion purely because Tim is standing in front of a big blue square space. No. A square space, not square space. I'm talking about blue screens, not what the best place is if you want a website. Making a professional looking website with Squarespace is so simple. Pick from one of the many templates available, and then you can extensively customize it to make the website look exactly the way that you want. There are then a whole host of professional looking features that you can add to the website through their website builder, such as an online store where you can sell your products or services, a calendar and appointment section where you can put your availability online and people can book with you. There's a complete marketing section, so anyone that subscribes to a mailing list, you can send out mass marketing emails to every one of them at the click of a button. And the great thing is that you can start a completely free trial today to see for yourself by using the link in the description. And if you use my promo code Dave McKeegan at checkout, you'll receive 10% off your first purchase. So let's break down all of the reasons that this isn't a CGI screen. A green screen or a blue screen creates a solid colour backdrop behind actors to make it easier to add special effects and change the background. Editors can simply select the green or the blue within the footage and then replace it with something else, such as a new background. Without a screen, it would be a very cluttered background in the video that you'd have to go through very, very carefully and select what is old background versus what is the person or stuff that you want to keep, and it would be very time consuming. So, recording in front of a screen is much easier for adding special effects. Except a friend of mine, Where's Wally, did a video looking at some of this a few weeks ago, and he found the actual broadcast video that Tim Peake was filming, and the screen is still visible. And the thing he's doing in this video is an experiment where he spins a green plastic ball around on some string and then lets go, and shows that the ball flies off in a straight line once the centripetal force of the string stops. And the ball travels into parts of the image outside of the blue screen. So the ball is unlikely to be CGI, and doing it in front of a blue screen is pointless if the things you're filming, like the ball or the person themselves, keep going off the screen. And whenever you watch VFX videos that show these screens being used during filming, the screens are always edited out in the final film. So straight off the bat, the fact that the screen is still there and the ball and Tim go beyond the screen show that this isn't really a screen for CGI purposes anyway. Now, in reality, what this screen is part of the experiment. You'll notice not only are there grid squares, but they're labelled along each axis from 0 to 10. This is done so the grids can be used for anyone watching it to use them as a reference for taking measurements and see how objects are actually behaving. This isn't the only experiment that Tim Peake did either. This is one of several videos he did for Astro Academy. Some of the other experiments included showing spring oscillations while it's floating and a ball slowly looping around a track and yet not falling to the ground. You know, the kind of experiments that can't really be done here on Earth. This screen has been used many other times by astronauts as well, again for science experiments. In fact, Where's Wally even sent me a link to a NASA document for what they call the EPO kit, or the Education Payload Operation Kit, which is summarised in the document as including education items that will be used to support live ISS education downlinks and EPO demonstrations on board the ISS. And the first item that is specified as being part of the kit is a Nomex backdrop with grid. So it's clearly for educational purposes, but there are many other reasons that we can see to show that this is not a special effects screen. For starters, such screens are always best as a single block colour, such as green or blue, not green with big white grid squares on and labelled axes. This is because when editors remove the screens, they want to be able to just select a single colour tone and get the whole screen, not having to select multiple tones. And selecting a particular tone for keying will select everything in the frame with that same tone. So if they were to try and key out the white grid lines, everything else in that frame that is white would also be removed. Now, Flatzoid did a live stream about this, and this was the explanation he gave for the grid squares.
Because if you've ever done tracking before, you know they can take a normal blue screen and they stick little marks like crosses and stuff all over for tracking. Yeah. Sometimes it's easier just to have the blocks, because then that makes it easier for them for the tracking to know where the augmented reality, because it hits in every point. Yeah, because it has
to keep it lined up. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There are times where tracking is needed and markers are placed on the backgrounds for software to work out the tracking. There are, however, a few flaws in his logic. Firstly, the tracking software generally looks for the corners of markers to get the best result. So often shapes like crosses, squares, or triangles are used. A complete grid system would arguably be less effective, as 4 intersecting lines on this grid would give 16 corners for the software to try and pick up, whereas having 4 individual crosses would offer 12 corners each for a total of 48 corners, which is 3 times more and would make it much more reliable for tracking. The second flaw in his claim refers back to the use of white grids. This video from Hollywood Camera Work talks extensively about the whole process, and they talk about the right choice of colour for the markers and the problems that the wrong colours can produce.
Starting with the color, the match moving software would love for us to use black or white markers because they have the best contrast. But the shot also has to be composited, and black and white markers would have to be painted out by hand, which is extremely hard and basically impossible behind hair. So we need a color we can key, and there are 2 ways to do that. First, to choose another primary color like blue. The downside, of course, is that we have a second illegal color, which is frustrating for wardrobe and props. But what's worse, most cameras can't handle such a hard color transition, with the result that the key will leave behind these kinds of footprints. The second approach is to use green markers in a different brightness than the green screen. As long as they're about a half stop different, the match moving software can see them.
So white grids would still be a very poor choice of colour. A slightly different shade of blue is what would be more suitable. The third flaw in his logic is why those markers are even used in the first place. Markers on a background are used in shots where the camera is moving position, because as the camera moves relative to the subject, there would be parallax between the subject and the background. So if they are adding in a false background, then that needs to move in a way that correlates to how the camera is moving, otherwise the shot wouldn't look right. Except the videos that Tim Peake is shooting are all on a static camera, evident by the fact that the framing doesn't change at all. So even if this was for VFX, and they just forgot to edit out the background, and forgot that white is a very bad choice of colour, the fact that the camera isn't moving means the background wouldn't need to move either, so it wouldn't need any markers because there would be no tracking being done. The only motion capture with static cameras that would require markers that I can think of is the likes used for films such as Avatar or Pirates of the Caribbean, where the actors themselves are being CGI'd, so they need markers on the person to track the person's movement, Then when it comes to using such screens, there are a few fundamental points needed in order to get them to work effectively. Not only should they be as close to a single block colour rather than an extremely patterned background, but they should be evenly lit so that the same colour tone appears across the whole screen.
You need to be able to do the best you can to achieve one flat color behind you. So if there's any wrinkles or maybe there's some shadows coming in, you want to make sure you're removing that with either more light or removing yourself from the background.
Uneven lighting will cause some parts of the screen to appear brighter shades whilst other parts will be darker shades, and so when keying these out, it will create more chance of inadvertently keying out other things which you don't want removed. But looking at Tim Peake's video, it's clear that the left side of the background is significantly brighter than the right. This could be due to how close Tim is placed to the screen, which is another point with using these screens, that it is best to keep your subject a reasonable distance away so you avoid them casting shadows on the screen. And the screen should also be as smooth as possible to avoid any shadows or uneven lighting from the material. Again, the Tim Peake video, we can see the background is very heavily crumpled with random shadows all over the place. All of this would make keying out that background much more difficult. However, those aren't even the biggest problem with all of this. As I've alluded to already through this video, background screens for special effects are pretty much always either green or blue. Green is probably the most common choice because it's just so far away on the colour spectrum from most human skin tones and hair colours, so there's very little chance of it clashing, but green does have quite a high luminosity, so blue might be a more preferred choice there because it doesn't add as much reflective light onto the scene. If you were to use a screen that was a similar colour to the skin tone of the actor, then when you tried to key out the screen, it would also remove all the visible skin, which, unless you're trying to go for a very freaky looking horror film, is probably something you will want to avoid. It's why when shooting in front of a green screen, people shouldn't wear green clothes, and why this happens when you do. Basically, the rule is avoid wearing any clothing that is a remotely similar colour to the screen that you are shooting in front of. Except Tim is wearing a dark blue top in front of an unevenly lit blue screen. You can even see on his left arm the background is nigh on the same shade of dark blue as the shirt, and it's very hard to tell them apart. If you try chroma keying that screen out there, it's going to take the shirt with it. It's like every single rule of how best to use a blue screen is being broken here. Extreme shifts in colours of the background, a background material which is far from smooth, uneven lighting, and inefficient setup for motion tracking, for a shot that doesn't require any tracking, a person standing too close to the screen and wearing the absolute worst colour imaginable, as well as himself and the only other object he's got both regularly going beyond the screen, and all for a shot where they forgot to edit the screen out in the end. Or perhaps it's got nothing to do with CGI at all. But then I'm not sure how that ball is floating in straight lines. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up for today. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring the video. If you've enjoyed it and you haven't already done so, then please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons, and hopefully we'll see you in the next video.